We're back at it again with another Battlefront update. It seems almost inevitable by now, but will we ever get the OT in Capital Supremacy? And if we do, then when? That's the gem of a question that we'll look to answering in today's video, all thanks to a recent retweet by DICE's lead developer. Along with that, we also have some news regarding some brand new changes DICE have made toward Capital Supremacy's capital ship phase and co-op, which I strongly believe should make positive strides for those modes. And finally, we'll also be touching on a big topic for November, and that is the new reinforcements coming this month. And before we get into any of that, a quick reminder, as if you do like these type of videos, then do remember to give it a like and show your support for not only this update series, but also the content within it. With that out of the way, let's get into it. So, ever since the hotfix patch landed last week, thankfully, for the most part, I can say that a lot of the problems we've had before are no more. Of course, there is still a minority of people from what I've noticed that are reporting crashes still to this day, but fortunately, the majority of console players are having no issues running the game. I tried out some large-scale games on PS4 recently too, just to see, and didn't experience a single crash. Sure, the game isn't perfect and there are still other problems present. But hey, at the same time, you can't expect the hotfix to take care of all of that, especially if it was mainly done to correct the memory leak crashing. I imagine the November update will be looking to tackle the rest of those leftover glitches, specifically if we don't get a mid-month patch like we did in October. Looking back, those are kind of uncommon to see, so I wouldn't be holding my breath on that being a regular thing with DICE. With that said, I did complain before that DICE should have tweaked the spawn timer in the hotfix, as it was turned up unnecessarily long after the October update. Well, fortunately, DICE have heard the feedback regarding this, and have made some changes here via server-side tweaks. The first change is objective health, where DICE have lowered the health of the objectives on the capital ship phase of Capital Supremacy. The health was lowered from 5,000 down to 3,000. Which is a good workaround to help lower the time of Capital Supremacy games, as anyone who plays those on the regular will surely know how long games can really go for. The next change is of course for the spawn timer, which has been lowered on co-op for the defend scenarios. Yet another good change, as I've said earlier. The spawn timer before was pretty ridiculous, and I'm glad to hear DICE have corrected the issue so soon after the hotfix. Now, speaking about Capital Supremacy, one Reddit user by the name Science Is About Why Not found a pretty neat data mine for that mode, more specifically for the capital ship phase. As it turns out, believe it or not, Capital Supremacy originally was planned to include an escape sequence. Check it out for yourself.
Head for the transport! You don't have long until the ship explodes! Enough with the showboating! Dust off already!
According to Science Is About Why Not, based on the voice lines, it seems that after blowing up the ship's reactor, players would have to return to the transport within a certain time frame. If they had to guess, it's likely this was removed due to players not really caring about trying to escape or prevent the other team from escaping, as it would have no effect on the winning team. Either way, this was a pretty neat find that gives us a bit more insight into the mode and what DICE originally envisioned it to be. Of course, given how long Capital Supremacy games can get, it's safe to say that this escape phase certainly would have made games even longer. So it's probably a good move by DICE for axing this small and kind of useless phase out of the mode entirely. Moving on, but we've also heard back from Ben Walk on the whole topic concerning blurred background spawn screens. Now, if you're a console player and never heard or know what this exactly is, it basically started as a mod for PC that saw whatever map you were playing on act as the blurred background for the spawn screen, kind of like how it is in DICE's other game series, Battlefield. Suffice to say, it looks brilliant and quickly became a highly requested feature by players for DICE to add to the game. And that's just it, as the sole purpose this mod was created for was to act as an alternative for the hologram spawn screen we first had in the game, which many players were not too fond of, let's not forget that. Now, DICE did hear that feedback and changed it to the Death Star panels that we have today. However, at the time, DICE did say that this was only a temporary change, as they were apparently working on bringing us something similar or better to what the PC mod blurred spawn screen was. Unfortunately, it's been a while now since the change to the temporary Death Star panels first occurred, and things now don't seem to be going in a productive direction here. As Benoit told players when asked about it, "It's all a matter of prioritization. We do everything we could, as any studio would, but we need to weigh up what's needed here and now and what could potentially come later on." This is an odd answer to give, having considered what we do have right now was never intended to be permanent. I understand that DICE are busy with other things like Rise of Skywalker content for example, but at the same time this is UI work, so it should be something for their UI designers to work on. Unless they're creating some special unique user interface designs for the Rise of Skywalker DLC, then I don't see any issue on them resuming their work on making blurred background spawn screens a thing for this game. Next up is one topic that I've been personally looking forward into that making it into the game ever since March 2019, and that is Capital Supremacy and Other Eras. As when that mode was first introduced, there had always been one common question that many players have asked, and for the most part has gone unanswered. And this being, will the original and sequel trilogy ever be incorporated into Capital Supremacy? As we all know, the mode started off and still at the time of this video is Clone Wars exclusive. And while it's very much understandable on why that was the case at the time of its release, but seeing as we now near 2020, I'm sure we can all agree that it's high time for Capital Supremacy to expand into the other trilogies. Because that means more maps to play on, more reinforcements to play with, and getting the opportunity to play with OT and SD heroes in a large-scale environment featuring command posts is a great option to have. It's just more content overall, and seriously, who wouldn't want that? Now from an interview back at Gamescom, DICE lead designer Dennis Brandvold revealed some intriguing facts regarding the future of the game. First, he said that DICE will be taking a break from the Clone Wars for now, suggesting that they will eventually return back to it, but for the time being focus on the other eras. Next, when asked if we'd ever see original trilogy content make a return, he replied with a resounding yes, giving us all the idea that while Clone Wars content may be taking a back seat for now, DICE for the time being will focus more on original trilogy content. Now before we tackle Capital Supremacy, there's also another mode that is only Clone Wars exclusive at the moment, which should really be mentioned, and that is co-op mode. Just like with Capital Supremacy, we would all love to see the OT and SD come to co-op, and recently to everyone's surprise, Dennis Brandvold low-key retweeted one person's tweet regarding this, saying that they would want to see those eras added to co-op. Now, out of all the things that people tweet to Dennis every single day, it's interesting to say the least to see him pick this to retweet and show off in his profile for the public to see. The way I look at this is Dennis low-key telling everyone that other eras are coming to co-op. Because hey, it's almost a certainty that they are coming to Capital Supremacy. And before we dive into that, I want to first have everyone think about something for a second. Ever since DICE introduced Capital Supremacy into the game, that has become their main priority for new content, and basically the main large-scale multiplayer mode for the game as far as DICE is concerned. Because think about it, since Capital Supremacy was added in March 2019, every single new map DICE added to the game was all for Capital Supremacy. Sure, a majority of those maps weren't new planets or anything like that, but were still regardless considered new maps as they had a different layout than their Galactic Assault counterparts. And of course, let's not forget about Felucia, which was a brand new planet with new assets and everything. And that only came out online-wise for Capital Supremacy and not for Galactic Assault. Because guess what, DICE has all but forgotten about Galactic Assault when it comes to new content. In the same vein, they forgot about Blast, Strike, Extraction, and Starfighter Assault. One part in this is that they have a small team and can only focus on one new map at a time. And the other is that, well, Capital Supremacy is DICE's priority right now. So having considered that, it's 90 to 95% likely that the new map we're getting in the Rise of Skywalker DLC will be for Capital Supremacy. And with that, guess what? This means that the mode is expanding to the Sequel Trilogy. And that's a big step to having the mode be accessible for all the eras. This really shouldn't be too much of a surprise too, having considered the First Order battlecruiser in the campaign is built pretty well for the capital ship phase for Capital Supremacy anyway. It even already has a reactor room made for the map, perfect for the final objective of the ship phase. All that's really missing, which I'm sure would be no issue in them adding, is having the hangar be connected and accessible to the player. Now, having said all of that, realistically, if we get the Sequel Trilogy added to Capital Supremacy in co-op, then it goes without saying that the original trilogy would be coming as well. Interestingly, DICE have never once denied the possibility of this happening, going as far back to when Ben was first asked about it, and seemed to be open for it, saying that they'll have to see what the future holds. When asked to go into detail, Ben at the time said, "Right now, we're focusing on Clone Wars Capital Supremacy. The thing with a live service is that it could evolve in multiple ways over time." And this comment basically told us that right now it's Clone Wars only, but this will change over time because of the live service they're running. If DICE had planned Capital Supremacy to be a Clone Wars only game mode permanently, then they would have said that straight out of the gate when asked about it, rather than using words like right now and suggesting that this will change over time due to the live service. What's also incredibly interesting is that thanks to this image from the alpha version of Battlefront 2, then we can clearly see DICE had planned to have some kind of multiplayer mode with objectives or command posts take place on an Imperial Star Destroyer. Seeing as how they clearly created this but it never made it over to the final game, then I think the original trilogy Capital Supremacy would be perfect to incorporate this. Another hint for original trilogy Capital Supremacy being a thing is a weird glitch that some players have reported of the game stating that they were playing a game of Capital Supremacy, but on Hoth, even though they were of course playing in Galactic Assault. This glitch would only happen for Hoth and no other map, which has led many in the community to assume that DICE had been working on a Hoth map for OT Capital Supremacy, and mistakenly left this in the game code revealing just that. And really, if Hoth does turn out to be one of the original trilogy CS maps, then I wouldn't be too surprised. Being a pretty open large map and with Star Destroyers floating up in the sky, it does fit the bill. As for the glitch in the game code, then this isn't the first time something like this had happened. Like for example, the discovery of Capital Supremacy, which occurred when people found the code for it in the game files back in 2018. Except back then it was called Titan mode. There the mode was registered for maps like Naboo, Tatooine, and Geonosis. While Naboo and Geonosis are Clone Wars maps and we certainly have those, it seems that DICE had planned Tatooine to be an OT Capital Supremacy map right from the get-go. And since that game code was leaked back in 2018, then it's certainly possible DICE hadn't yet worked on a Hoth CS map, which explains why it wasn't included in the leak. Now, given Dennis Brandvold's recent tweet for OT and ST co-op, along with everything else we covered that gives evidence for an OT and ST Capital Supremacy mode, the other question we have is when will this be happening? Well, this is simple to answer for the Sequel Trilogy part. Because if the new map for Rise of Skywalker DLC does turn out to be a Capital Supremacy map, then it goes without saying that December would be the start of Capital Supremacy for the Sequel Trilogy. As for the original trilogy, well then if you asked me a month or so ago, I would have said November. It really would have worked considering DICE are making now content for that era again. We're also expected to get new reinforcements in November as well, which should most likely be original trilogy focused. Because like we said before, DICE are taking a break from Clone Wars. Sequel Trilogy stuff is happening in December, so obviously all that leaves us is original trilogy for November. As for what the new reinforcements will be, well, we won't know that until later. But Benoit has revealed that DICE have held internal talks regarding Ewoks becoming a reinforcement for the Rebel Alliance. He also said he couldn't share what the outcome of those talks came out to be, which is a bit suspicious to say the least. I'd imagine if DICE thought the idea was bad or ridiculous, they would have passed on it and Ben would have freely said, yeah, no Ewoks wouldn't work or something like that. He's flat out said this many times before for other reinforcement ideas, yet oddly is reluctant to give us a yes or no answer for Ewok reinforcements. Now, I personally would think that giving the Rebels Ewoks as our new reinforcement would be lazy, as I'd much rather see something better and cooler. I made a video before covering all the special op units that the Rebels had in canon, and there were a few there I definitely would have picked over getting Ewoks for sure. But if we do end up having Ewoks, then I'll be just glad we got something, honestly. On that note, it would make sense to give us OT Capital Supremacy in November during the same month that we get new OT reinforcements. That was the case of Clone Wars, where we got Capital Supremacy and the first new Clone Wars reinforcements all in the same month. So it wouldn't be out of the ordinary to do the same with the OT in November. But if not, then I'm thinking January would also be the next potential release month. And that's because we'll likely be returning back to Clone Wars content in February for Clone Wars Season 7. And by then, it's going to be real difficult to see DICE be motivated in returning back to the original trilogy. Granted, a lot of this depends on the new Rise of Skywalker map to be available for Capital Supremacy. And like I said before, the chances for that to happen are incredibly high, as DICE have pretty much forgotten about Galactic Assault as a mode, just like they did of some other modes in the game. Felucia is pretty much a good example of that. However, with all the teases we've seen DICE make about Capital Supremacy expanding to other modes, along with the retweet for co-op doing just the same, then I honestly can't imagine we've got much longer to wait to see the OT and ST finally make it to Capital Supremacy. But that'll do it for this Battlefront update. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to not only support it, but keep up with Star Wars news, gaming, and canon lore released every week. And consider following me on Twitter and Facebook to never miss out on the latest Star Wars content. Thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.